I choose to walk in spirit is difficult, dealing with all of the ignorance. But in the Bible, and still talking about the Bible, what is the benefit? Everything about your counterfeit, there ain't no rebuttal you can counter with. On the internet, you the master teacher. In real life, you powerless. Keep it real with you, I don't have time for this. I ride for this, my forefathers died for this. They cry for this opportunity, presently I possess, and right now you are the opposite. If you walk in love, you fulfill the law. Don't get involved and you ain't giving it all. If you ever think it's cool to threaten another man's family, then you already lost. Chemtrails got aluminum, heavy metal saturate the atmosphere. Manhattan Project, time travel, Mandela effect, what happened here? GMO food processing to the whole world become obsolete. A black man who believes in Jesus, got my own team taking shots at me. You trespassing on property that you don't fully understand properly. All the back and forth, that's not for me, that's for ROC and the war machine. If we ride together, then we ride together. If we can't do it, I'd rather leave. I still stand on the word of God till the day I die and no longer breathe. We trapped inside the diaspora, nightmares of the massacre. Cold sweat, I'm below deck in the middle passage, just a passenger. Revolutionary hardcore, liberation, that's a hard job. You ain't ready, you a oddball, keep your mouth closed like lockjaw. I learned trying to bring people together on the same page, make them separate. All the talk about reconciliation, when the time come, you hesitate. If Jesus was able to sit at the table with a bunch of sinners, you very fake. Your steps ordered by the Lord, and how it was yesterday, a big mistake. We the city sitting on the hill. Guess it all depends on how you live. Guess it all depends on how you feel, and we both know that ain't God's will. I stood on what I felt was right, I don't never question if God's real. Trapped inside this matrix, I'm about to pop the red and the blue pill.
Bless them which persecute you, bless and curse not. Rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep. Be of the same mind one toward another. Mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. Be not wise in your own conceits. Recompense to no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, said the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. Romans 12:14-21.
You're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not Manny. I am Peyton Manning level, I'm on GOAT status. I think I'm the baddest mother lover ever walk on this planet. Damn it, you could never see me, you could never beat me, you could never be me, disrespect me, and I'm eating all of your pizza. I know I'm not right, I know I'm not white, I know I'm gon' call the popo on you if you hit me. I don't fight, I'm a rapper, I don't write. Rio, you got all that hype, that's the stuff that I don't like. Why you laughing at my height? I wish I could slap your face. You just think you're so amazing, you just think that you're the greatest. Why you fucking Tom Brady? I am Peyton Manning, end of conversation. You just hating, I am Peyton Manning, say it. I am Peyton Manning, say it. No, Dibble God plan, that's a Drake line. Beat a midget up, that's a hate crime. 8 towns on 3 game time. Got the trunk knocking from the baseline. I'm all about the money, baby, crocker cake time. Chopsticks on deck, no Shanghai. 4-5, you come to my waistline. Keep the 4-5 tip by my waistline. You soft in the middle like fruit pie. I know it hard for you to walk a straight line. You wouldn't throw trays in the food fight. Hear what I heard through the grapevine. I know you don't mind wasting your time. I would just prefer you didn't waste mine. You gon' get what coming to you in due time. Little pussycat running from the K9. You're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, you're not hating Manny, hating Manny, you're not hating Manny. You're not hating, Manny. You ain't nowhere in my category, mandatory for me to tell you that you were very boring. And the moral of the story, I wish I could just ignore you, but I gotta bury your body, put you in the crematorium. And I'm the only audio inside the auditorium. And when I'm finished with you, you will not have no memorial. You wanna be Luigi, but you're not ready for Mario. And no scenario, running circles around your cardio. And that's a body blow, it's not a secret. Everybody know that you ain't coming close. I leave you comatose, and you become a ghost. I overdose, I gotta overload. That's when the windows of heaven open up for me with the overflow. And I can feel the power moving within every last chromosome. Battle right around the corner, you already know it's on. Understand me, you're not hating, Manny. You're not hating, Manny. Woo!
Peace. What it is, it's your brother Tyvon Swaino, a.k.a. the Orthodox Moore, a.k.a. the Seven Pillar Saracen, a.k.a. Brother Moore. Wishing you all peace and blessings. And this is probably won't be my final installment, but it's my last installment so far of the consensus on the pews with cultural context, given the fact that I've been able to now see the Cryptic Quest documentary in full. I really wish I could show y'all the whole documentary, family. Let me do this for a second. Yeah, I wish I could show y'all the whole documentary, family, because it's an ill documentary. And even it's a short documentary that you could tell is a lot longer. And you could tell it's a lot longer by the way they edited it. They had to cut a lot of information out, but it was a beautiful documentary. But yeah, we've done a lot of videos dealing with the scholarly consensus on the pews and what people have to say, etc. And so now that I've been able to see 3 documentaries on this whole thing, we've emailed a whole bunch of people. You got people on all sides emailing people, and so we were able to gather all the scholastic information together and see what was what. So I hope y'all are edified on this. I could have got way more detailed on it, but there was no need to, being that like there's a bunch of videos on this. So with that, family, I'm going to go over what the different scholars have said, what their positions are, and then I'm going to show you a clip from the Cryptic Quest that I thought was or some clips that I thought were of interesting note, being that some clips had been released earlier in the movie, shedding a certain context. I think it's good to see some other clips just to get some better context to the movie. With that being said, I'm going to get into the presentation. Like I said, I hope y'all are edified. And with that, let me get into it. Oh, I forgot to add transition to this one too. Hold on, family. Real time editing. For this is just for me. I can't go through the edits or the slides without something to look at. When it's just a real quick flip, it messes with my eyes a little bit. So I appreciate the patience. This is something I got to do for me to make sure my dyslexia doesn't kick in. Bam. Let's make sure this works. Yes, sir. So before getting into the scholarly consensus on the pews, let's make sure we're clear on the claims that were made by laymen on the pews so far. Some have said that the markings are scribbles and scratches and not language, or could be scribbles and scratches and not language. Some suggested that the markings are possible natural growths in the wood. The markings are a possible form of West African Arabic. The markings are possibly a form of Ladino or Soletreo. Some have said the markings are possibly multiple scripts of Africa, etc. The markings are possibly some form of trade language, and the markings are possibly ciphers, codes, and maps, etc. And potentially like a mix of all of the above, obviously. But these are all the different suggestions that have been put out in terms of what they could be. So going forward, way too fast of a transition. Slow it down. Hold on. Me got to slow this one down. Apply all. There we go. Again, the scholarly consensus on the pews with the cultural context, because that part is super important. With the cultural context. So first and foremost, we have Dr. Ephraim Isaac. I'm not going to give you everyone's scholarly background on this because, like I said, it'd be redundant having done all the previous videos I've done on this. But Dr. Ephraim Isaac is definitely someone serious in his field. If you read translations of the Ethiopian book of Enoch translated in English, most likely you're reading his translation in college or something like that, etc. He's of Ethiopian and Yemenite Jewish descent, and he was brought in to speak on the Ethiopic aspects of things as well as linguistically. Dr. Ephraim Isaac positively, and I'll say positively / possibly, but when you watch the documentary, it's pretty positive. Some people try to take the opposite account and say it wasn't positively identified. So I'll try to be charitable and say positively / possibly. Identified some Ethiopian letters in the Ge'ez script on some pews, potentially identifying Ha, Sa, Ra, or Ri in a possible Na. He also saw at the very end of the documentary, a potential Sheen. And they don't say if it's him or not. And this is how I know that it's a really heavily edited documentary. They don't say if it's him or not, but they point to a pew when they're there in person versus when they're in pictures and when they're showing the pictures and whatnot, which indicates that it was him. That there's a potential shorthand version of the Tetragrammaton, not the full YHWH, but the shorthand version of it on a pew. So he potentially identified a Sheen and potentially the shorthand version of the Tetragrammaton on a pew, on different pews at that. And this is important to note because it was being said that Dr. Isaac had previously. It was being said that he was saying in the documentary that there was no Hebrew on the pews. Over a year ago, that was something that Garfield was saying, and so when I pressed Garfield, he eventually put out portions of the video, whatnot. And shout out to Garfield because he didn't have to do that. You know what I'm saying? It was shown that Dr. Isaac did not make those claims. Not only did he not make the claims that there was no Hebrew on the pews, he actually did the opposite. He said that there was possibly Hebrew on the pews, as well as identifying Ge'ez script. Going forward, he also gave some Ethiopic theological reasoning as to why one might find single letters and not words written on the pews. That the single letters could be recited as a form of protection prayer or spell. And this is him talking about like ha 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 ba 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 la 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 la. He also talks about one that sounds like ahia shara hia shara hia shara hia. Oh, did I go backwards? I must have. My fault, family. Next, we have Dr. and Rabbi Richard Saracen. He possibly identified some Hebrew letters on one pew, a kuf and a bet. However, it felt there was a problem with the letters being surrounded by things that were not Hebrew letters. And poses the issue. It's what the signs add up to. So he wasn't sounding confident at all in the documentary that there was actual Hebrew on the pews and whatnot. And from what I understand in watching the documentary, he didn't go to the church in person. He just saw pictures of the pews and whatnot. From what I understand, the people who went to the church in person from the documentary were Dr. Ephraim Isaac, Dr. Mir Jamal Torre, Karen Wortham, and I believe the narrator of the documentary. Next up, we have Dr. Jeffrey Kahn. who's the Regius Professor of Hebrew at Cambridge or whatnot. He also knows quite a bit about Arabic. He publishes articles on medieval Arabic, Judeo-Arabic, etc., etc., etc. Dr. Jeffrey Kahn positively identified Arabic letters and ruled out Hebrew on one pew. He only had pictures of one pew he was looking at. He also positively identified an ayat in Surah from Surah 114 from the Quran on the same pew. So he identified Surah 114 ayat 3 on that pew. And there was some dispute as to whether or not there's Hebrew on that pew or not. He definitively said, like, in Hebrew, again, he has a background in Semitic languages, period. Does articles on the topics of Hebrew, medieval Arabic, Judeo-Arabic, etc., etc., etc. He positively identified Surah 14 ayat 1-3 and rejected the concept of there being Hebrew on that pew. On that one particular pew, not all of them, on that one particular pew. So he's not coming out saying there's no Hebrew on none of the pews whatsoever. Nope. He just had access to one single solitary pew, and photos just did that. But he was confident, very confident in the fact that it was Surah 114 ayat 3. We have Associate Professor Samar Ali, who said that it looked like Arabic in the West African script, and that it could possibly be a 3-word snippet of Surah 114 of the Quran. Again, he also only had photos of one pew. He didn't have access to all the pews. Very few people in this had access to more than one pew. Like Dr. Ephraim Isaac had access to more than one pew. Richard Saracen had access to more than one pew. And Boubacar Diakite had access to more than one pew. Most of these cats just had one pew they were looking at. So that also needs to be understood, family. And that needs to be understood in the spectrum of understanding of this whole thing. Assistant Professor Godazi did not believe the writings contained Arabic, however, admitted that it could be a form of West African Arabic and suggested a scholar on West African Islam be consulted. He said that one could possibly read 2 phrases from the Quran, but thought this was imposing on the markings. He also only had photos of one pew. So to him, he thought like trying to read into it was literally trying to read into it, which is a perspective to be respected in this whole thing. It's not one that I take, because I personally think it lacks a cultural nuance. I think once you understand the full cultural nuances involved, it becomes right and proper at one point to try to even speculate in trying to figure out what's there, just knowing what could be there, right? I'm not saying like rest your laurels on the speculation. I'm saying you might have to speculate in order to figure something out at one point. Like let's say there's a trade language or whatnot, right? Potential trade language. You kind of got to speculate a little bit to kind of figure things out there. Once you get the proof to back it up, then you got that, right? So I don't personally take the belief that reading into things is reading into things. However, I do take the stance that reading into things without verification and without proof, that's definitely reading into things. Boubacar Diakite, preceptor of the African language program at Harvard, identified writings on the pews as an Arabic type of writing in a PBS documentary, and on a cultural level added that writers may not have been Muslim. Boubacar also translated phrases on the pews in Arabic such as "There is no God but Allah" and "Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." So we have Arabic being confirmed on the pews, on 2 different pews, for instance. And what's interesting about this pew here is the pew that has the "There's no God but Allah" on it also has the same markings on it that Dr. Ephraim Isaac also said would be the Ge'ez markings. So on one pew we have potential Ge'ez markings and potential Arabic all on one pew. And like I said, Boubacar's from Mali. And I can't stress this enough. He is a West African Muslim himself, right? And when he's given this breakdown of the pews on the PBS documentary, this needs to be understood. He gives the cultural context that the people who may have left the Arabic type of writing on the pews may have been Christian themselves, but were keeping a religious continuity, worshiping the same God. That needs to be fully understood in this whole thing, because a lot of people keep trying to make this argument of it's either Arabic or Hebrew, and if it's Arabic, you're trying to say that the people were Muslim. Well, a West African Muslim came over and said, no, that doesn't have to be the case. That doesn't have to be the case at all. They could have been Christian writing this stuff. And when you understand the history of the Low Country and who was coming through and what was going on from Florida to the Carolinas and whatnot, what he's saying makes a lot of sense, man. And has a lot of cultural background to it. Next, we have Dr. Brian Kirshen. This is someone I reached out to personally. He said that at first glance, he thought some letters looked Arabic. This is on the same pew that everyone else is looking at. The pew there was a dispute as to whether or not there is Hebrew or Arabic. Or, when I say Hebrew, I mean just a specific form, Solatreo. And so I contacted Dr. Kirshen because he was familiar with Solatreo and something called El Hamiado, which is Latin texts written in Arabic script. And so what he had to say was that the letters first looked Arabic, and that the letters did, or excuse me, I was supposed to say did not conform to Solatreo. Matter of fact, I got to do this right now because it's going to bug me if I don't. Pardon me, family. Did not conform to Solatreo. He also said in a subsequent email that the markings did not seem to be Solatreo or Ladino, right? So they weren't in any way, shape, or form the Sephardic Hebrew script, the block letter or the cursive and whatnot. He, however, did attempt to read something from a highlighted photo of hand drawings of the markings on a single pew. So one more time, he did attempt to read, even though he said that the letters didn't conform to Solatreo. I asked him if he could try to make something out of it, and so he attempted to. And it was from I want you to understand this. It was a highlighted photo of hand drawings of markings on a single pew, because that's what the person did who was suggesting Solatreo and whatnot, right? And so when he did that, after having said that the letters didn't conform to Solatreo, he came out with the rendering of Ario. He came out with the potential rendering of Ario, but again said that he didn't think that it seemed to be Solatreo or Ladino. Now, what's interesting about this is this rendering is completely different than the rendering of what the people were suggesting was said in Solatreo. So that's of note. And going further, we have Dr. Amir Jamal Toure, who is a Gullah Geechee historian and activist. He spoke. He was on the documentary as well, the Cryptic Quest and whatnot. He spoke to the literacy in Arabic of the Gullah Geechee. From Bilali Muhammad writing a West African Islamic text, the Risalah, on Sapelo Island. And he also spoke of London. Now, he didn't directly speak about London in the documentary. He alluded to London based upon the person who had his writings and whatnot. I personally believe he spoke about London, but it just got cut off, right? He later spoke about London on camera, though. He speaks about London on camera and as a Mandingo slave in Savannah that wrote the Gospel of John in Gullah using the Arabic script. And again, you'll see what I'm talking about when I say he alludes to this in the documentary. Because if you're aware of the people he's talking about and the person he's talking about and the study being done, it becomes self-evident. Dr. Toure also echoed the same cultural notion as Boubacar Diakite in that he spoke on non-Muslims learning Arabic in Quran schools in West Africa. He spoke on the 9-patch design, the one that's that's seen on the roof of the church in Savannah, Georgia, for instance, right? He referenced he spoke on the 9-patch design being used in northern Nigeria. He also spoke on symbols Oh, dear, look, live edit again. See, messing up left and right. There we go. He spoke on symbols having multiple meanings across Africa. Symbols like the Pakongo cosmogram and Lalibela in Ethiopia, i.e., like Ethiopian crosses and whatnot. He didn't say the Ethiopian crosses. That's me, fam. But that I thought was extremely interesting, particularly when you think about all the different markings that we're looking at, right? So we have a Bakongo cosmogram symbol. We're talking like Angola, Congo, right there, right? 9 patch coming from Nigeria, right? Potential Ge'ez coming from like Ethiopia, etc., right? Arabic coming from all kind of places in West Africa and potentially East Africa, right? Central and East Africa, right? Potential Hebrew, etc., on the pews and whatnot. This place is a treasure trove of different markings and languages and fingerprints of all the different avenues and routes of the slave trade, fam. And that's why what he says here is so important in terms of the symbols having different meanings with different cultures and whatnot, because we're talking like with Lorenzo Dow Turner looking at the Gullah language, he looked at 21 different languages coming together. So you're going to see some level of symbolic syncretism. And people hear that word like, oh my God, that's an evil word. No, fam, that's literally like how we made languages like Creole. That's literally how we blended languages together, fam. So we can make trade languages and talk to each other. But what I'm going to do here, because I do believe this is my last slide. Yeah. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually show a piece of the documentary, a portion that has not been seen yet. Again, I'm not going to show the whole thing, but I'm going to touch on some parts that I think are interesting. So with that, let me share my screen. All right. I'm going to show some portions with Dr. Minjamal Torre and Dr. Ephraim Isaac, etc. I'd love to see what y'all think about this, because I think it adds some really interesting context to this stuff. But without further ado, I'm going to mute my mic and play this thing here.
We tend to isolate and not look at the cultural unity of Africa. Yeah. Most people who know, pre-colonial Africa, there's a cultural unity, even though people may be Kisi and they're in Western Africa. But guess what? You know that their origins come from Eastern Africa. Yeah. So that's a part of Shea Antijoke showed that in pre-colonial Africa. So that's why I said, just like when we look at the Bakongo cosmogram downstairs, other African people have other names for that. They are going to tell us, as we look at Lalibela, what is that basically the same thing? So again, now I say so many times we try to isolate it, and with the Afro-Asiatic languages, it's not just some Amharic, Ge'ez, yes, Arabic.
East Africans were the ones that primarily wrote in these Afro-Asiatic scripts. The issue is the majority of the slaves came from West Africa.
Historically, we know a large number of Africans were brought from West Africa as slaves. But we now also know that there were many Africans who were brought from the east side. We mentioned before Zanzibar, and even from Ethiopia.
William Hodgson went around recording Africans writing in these Afro-Asiatic languages. Hodgson later said he had all this access before to these Africans, but then later on, it stopped. He said that he was no longer allowed to have contact with them. Why is that? Because we understand politically what was happening. Because Europeans had said that Africans had no civilization. But because now he was showing that, in fact, these Africans had civilization by writing, that meant the abolitionists were now going to use that against them and say, they have writing, so that means they have civilization. So it's now going to debunk the myths and the stereotypes of saying Africans were uncivilized. In fact, Hodgson now realized that, hey, he was not becoming basically an asset for the abolitionists, but the folks who even lived with him in Savannah, so that it was going against their best interests.
William Hodges' discovery of Africans having writing became problematic for the treatment of slaves. The justification of the cruel treatment of slaves was based on the premise that they weren't completely human, more closer to animals. And we can see the cruel nature of this treatment reflected on how these slaves were transported to America.
William Hodgson went around recording Africans writing in these Afro-Asiatic languages. Hodgson later said he had all this access before to these Africans, but then later on, it stopped. He said that he was no longer allowed to have contact with them. Why is that? Because we understand politically what was happening. Because Europeans had said that Africans had no civilization. But because now he was showing that, in fact, these Africans had civilization by writing, that meant the abolitionists were now going to use that against them and say, they have writing, so that means they have civilization. So it's now going to debunk the myths and the stereotypes of saying Africans were uncivilized. In fact, Hodgson now realized that, hey, he was not becoming basically an asset for the abolitionists, but the folks who even lived with him in Savannah, so that it was going against their best interests.
William Hodges' discovery of Africans having writing became problematic for the treatment of slaves. The justification of the cruel treatment of slaves was based on the premise that they weren't completely human, more closer to animals. And we can see the cruel nature of this treatment reflected on how these slaves were transported to America.
On Sapelo, Bilali Muhammad, what they had called was his diary back in the 1800s. They later learned in the 20th century that actually he was writing the Risala, which is a West African legal text. Berset means the day is clean. But guess what? When we go to the Kemetic language, what do we use for dawn? Because basically the day is clean means dawn. But what is the word that we use there? The root, akhet. Even though they may have been called in Quranic schools, they were also non-Muslim Africans who also going there. So that's why, again, I would say that cultural unity. The civilization, that again, that the argument is not being thwarted by what occurred here when these Africans are putting these writings down in the 1850s. So it's not just about a religious experience, first Africans are significant with regards to, but also with regard to the cultural phenomena of Africans here in the Americas. And that's why, again, like people, not just here in the US, but in the entire Americas.
Raymond Money, the French scholar, has written a book in which, in fact, he talks about like Jewish settlements in Ghana. In those days, as you know, in North Africa and Spain, Jews and Muslims were in many ways very close. Sometimes there was conflict, but most of the time, even the Kingdom of North Africa and Spain, there was what we call the golden age of Islam. There was a lot of collaboration between Jews and Muslims. But in any case, the existence of Jews in Ghana is already well documented.
Oh, now that looks like a sheen, a Hebrew sheen.
What sheen? This one here.
The first one.
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
what does Masjid Jihad, First African Baptist Church, literally?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Hi, you didn't hear it last time I was on mute. Hi. So yeah, I replayed that clip earlier so y'all could see that there was the person that they were talking about that recorded that the African languages amongst the Africans. They had recorded Arabic amongst the people from a bunch of different sources, but one of them being the Gospel of John, written in the Gullah dialect in the Arabic script by a Mandingo slave named London in Savannah and whatnot. So just to be clear, this part that I'm playing here is not part of the Cryptic Quest documentary. This is separate, right? This is Amir Jamal Toure talking on a Facebook post, but he's speaking about what I suspect he was talking about in the movie, in that clip there with talking about the African language being recorded, etc. So this part's pure speculation as to what he was saying that got clipped out, but he does in fact say this stuff, right? And this needs to be understood.
Literary works from the 19th centuries and unraveling Mount True have in common. They all have some languages, a language that plays a role with regards to us and our culture and our history. I tell folks this often: African-American Christians tend to fight against traditions that come from Africa that are not tied to Christianity, that are part of your foundation. When we talk about the Black church has many traditions that are not tied to Christianity, or the origin's not tied to Christianity. It got melded into Christianity, so it becomes a part of it. And Masjid Jihad, First African Baptist Church, have something in common. What do they deal with? Arabic. Masjid Jihad is the oldest Muslim community in this area. And also, it deals with Arabic, just like at First African Baptist Church, because some of the people who were members of First African were Muslims in Africa, African Muslims, who now come over here. And these are the people that intimately know about Jesus. Yes, Jesus is important in Islam. So Jesus is a part of their story. So when they come over from Africa, they come with that knowledge with them. And they now go to places like First African, or just in the city of Savannah in general, or in this area in coastal Georgia, where they now are writing in Arabic in the 1800s, and not just 1800s, in the 1700s. Jamal, what are you saying? I'm saying not just about Arabic, but I'm saying other African languages were spoken right here in Savannah, Georgia, in coastal Georgia. In fact, Africans, your ancestors, people who listening and looking right now, your ancestors in some cases spoke 7 languages right here. Up until the 1900s, French was spoken in Savannah, Spanish, Portuguese, German, Arabic, and other African languages, all spoken in the 1900s. And also, Unraveling Mount True, that means speaking Gullah. That means speaking Gullah. Because Gullah is our language, African language created right here. So this is all tied to Masjid Jihad, the Gullah language, because the first person to write the Gullah language is not in Charleston, South Carolina, not in Georgetown, South Carolina, not on St. Helena, not in Beaufort, but in Savannah, Georgia. His name is London. He's an African held in captivity. Oh, I said literary works. Guess what? London is known to have written the Gospel of John in Arabic in the 1800s in the Gullah language. So he didn't write it in English, he wrote it in the Gullah language, that African language. He is the first person to write the Gullah language. So you don't know your story like that, but that's why we want to share it with you, so you now have a full understanding. So the Gullah language, the first time it's ever written down is, again, not in Jacksonville, Florida, not in St. Augustine, Florida, not in Brunswick, Georgia, but in Savannah, Georgia, by an African by the name of London. And he's writing in Arabic. In addition, London takes it to another level. London also is writing gospel hymns in Arabic. I'll repeat, he's writing gospel hymns in Arabic. So again, here's somebody who's an African Muslim in Africa, but now when he comes over here and brought into the U.S., now become a Christian, because again, they understand that's a part of their fabric. They don't have any hatred, any dislike. So African-American Christians, I'd say to you, you can't be fighting about this story right here. Do not fight the Crusades. That's not your story. because you are all one people. Everyone understood the power of God and the importance of the messiahs and the prophets of God and the angels of God. So yes, First African Baptist Church, on the sides of the pews up there, you can see what pews are written, where they say, La ilaha illallah, which is there is no God but God, on the sides of the pews in First African Baptist Church. It's not Hebrew, it is Arabic, because see, again, when you don't know your story, you don't want to accept the fact that there were African Muslims that were brought over here who make up some of the members of your family tree. Your DNA, when you do your DNA research, you're not even understanding that it's African Muslims who make up a part of that. So London is writing in Arabic, but then let's go down to Sapelo. People like to talk about Sapelo Island. And there's a man on Sapelo Island who will write a word too. The Risala, which is a West African legal text. His name is Bilali Muhammad. So Bilali Muhammad and people from Sapelo, many of them like to pride themselves being descendants of Bilali. So I say to you, you must go ahead and let people understand there's nothing wrong with you having that Muslim family member on your family tree. That's part of your foundation, that best of the best. Also, on St. Simon's Island, you have Salih bin Ali, who also is conversant in Arabic in the 1800s, right here in coastal Georgia. But let's go up the road to a place called Charleston, South Carolina. This man his name is Omar ibn Said. Omar ibn Said wrote in Arabic in the 1800s the Lord's Prayer. He told them it was the Lord's Prayer in Arabic in the 1800s. But when it's translated in the 1900s, they said, oh no, this is Al-Fatiha. This is the opening to the Quran. He wrote that in the 1800s and was a part of a church called, or I should say, part of a group of people affiliated with a church called Emmanuel Amy Church. Mother Emmanuel Amy Church. Yes, Omar ibn Said. Again, once over here, he is now Christian, and he will now become a part of the fabric of the society right here. Omar ibn Said also is one of the members of the Denmark BC conspiracy that did not get lynched, did not get executed. All right, he survived it. They didn't know fully about his role in that with Gullah Jack in Denmark BC. But the story of Omar ibn Said doesn't end there. Again, we're talking about works that go back to the 1800s, excuse me. Omar ibn Said will write what is called one of the slave narratives. That is right about his own life, like Alado Equiano, Inicio Sancho. All of them wrote books about their lives in the 1800s and the 1700s. And one book that is written that is unique is written by Omar ibn Said. Omar ibn Said will have his book written about his life, his autobiography written about his life. And guess what? It was written in Arabic. So some scholars are going to say the only slave narrative to be written in Arabic was written by a man by the name of Omar ibn Said. Yes, it's part of your history. So when people talk about Africans not having civilization, guess what? If you have some understanding, if you have writing, that means you have civilization. So again, that's why I tell people, when you're not going to cut off the branches of your family tree that tied to people who profess al-Islam, you cut off a part of your story with regard to the strength of your story with regard to your humanity. Tell folks, you got to open up. You got to understand. You got to understand other cultures and languages. Do not follow people who are ignorant, who don't understand that. That's why we are weakened. But when you have the power, you cannot show the connection. And those of us who are Gullah Geechee, the ring shout. You know the ring shout tradition when we go around counterclockwise. That came from the African Muslims because they could do everything except go to Hajj. So this tradition right here is our story. And that's why I say we need to understand it, because it shows our civilization, our connection to God, our power, and show how we're all one people. Don't let somebody separate us. And so that's the beauty of this right here. That again, there's a connection between all of us, the Gullah language right here in Savannah, Georgia, tied to Arabic. The Gullah language is connecting people right here throughout the coastal areas of Georgia, South Carolina, and Northern Florida. Our power, our story. And also understanding when we write in Arabic right here in Savannah, Georgia, we authenticate and verify African civilization in your face. Let's go to Jamaica. In Jamaica, Africans wrote in Arabic in Jamaica. What do they do when they write in Arabic? They're keeping the books for the plantation owners in Jamaica. So essentially, they're serving as accountants with regards to that in Jamaica in the 1600s and 1700s. Also, let's go to another place called Brazil. And Brazil, when they went to have their rebellions, they wrote in Arabic also because the Portuguese didn't know it. And they could then go and fight. And there's a man by the name of Francisco Menendez, who was in a place called Fort Mose, which is the first free place for Black folks in this country or in North America, as we know. Fort Mose, down outside St. Augustine, he spoke 7 languages, and one language he spoke was Arabic. So yes, but he will become Catholic there at Fort Mose and become one of the leaders. Know your story, know your greatness.
Yeah, one of the things that I really appreciated in seeing Amir Jamal Toure in Dr. Amir Jamal Toure in that documentary, The Cryptic Quest, was when he spoke on the part about their cultural cohesion, because that's a big aspect of the Gullah Geechee culture. It's a blend of West African Islam, Christianity, and West African spiritual traditions and whatnot. And so when he's doing things like talking about the ring shop, for instance, right? And this directly plays into people talking about the trade language concept, because that's still alive and well. That theory is still alive and well. That hypothesis is still alive and well. And I'll be putting out a video real shortly on that one. But when Dr. Jamal Toure is talking about the ring shop, that concept of going to Hajj or whatnot, that's not just an Islamic concept. If you haven't seen my previous video on Low Country Christianity and the First Fruits and the Israelite traditions amongst the Low Country Christians or Low Country Christianity or Gullah Geechee Christians, I break down the fact that in Hebrew, the word for festivals, etc., is Hagag and Chag, which is the Hebrew equivalent to Hajj, and that the Hebrew word actually means to circumambulate, to go into a circle, to walk in a sacred procession in a circle, to dance, to celebrate a festival, a solemn feast, etc. So there's that tradition right there is not just, and I'm gonna speak on this a little bit, like, so they're not just from Muslims, they're from Muslims who also are around Israelites and also may also be Israelites themselves, but of a Muslim faith. So in West Africa, there was a lot of people who practiced, who were ethnically Israelite, who did convert to Islam. And I'll definitely be touching that on a future video, because we can find out what form of Islam they most likely practiced and all that kind of stuff. But so just to be clear, with the people talking about the trade language, just talking about like that there was people who knew Hebrew and people who knew Arabic side by side, and that the languages started to blend in their trade language. So we need to understand that there was cultural practice that were similar amongst both of them as well. So a lot of people just like say, oh, this is the West African Muslim thing. Yes, and sometimes it can go in 2 different directions. It can be Islamic and Israelite. But I pray y'all were edified by this video and were able to glean some information in terms of where we're at with the consensus on this thing. I honestly wish that this could have come out like a year ago, this video. We could be a lot further in understanding the Pews and understanding how it relates to everybody of African descent in this country, not just people who were trying to claim an Israelite thing or whatever. No, anybody who has descent from the slave trade, this church and these pews are a gold mine. They are a national treasure for anybody whose descendancy comes through the slave trade, because that church and those pews, etc., have fingerprints from every direction of the slave trade on it, from multiple peoples, the ones we all come from. So that church in and of itself is a living repository of the fingerprints of the slave trade. And that cannot be underestimated or underappreciated. We need to do what we can to protect that church, to go see the church as much as possible, and to glean as much information as we can for our ancestors from that church. Be they the ones that practiced Christianity, Islam, or the traditional African religions. But with that, family, I pray that y'all was edified. I'm not going to stand there too long. I appreciate y'all for coming through. Please leave your questions down below. If there was some information I did not touch on that you wished I would have, please let me know. Because like I said, I didn't touch on everything in here just because there's been a lot of a lot of videos made on the topic. And I didn't want to really belabor information that had already been put out there. So if you felt like I skimmed over some things and you want more specifics, let me know, and I can definitely rehash that. So with that, family, I appreciate y'all for coming out. And with that, I say peace and love.
I like the way this feel, yeah. Let my soul cry, yeah, yeah, yeah. Minister, we gonna speak from the heart on this one. I'm performing lyrical funerals, no obituary. I killed your boy and brought him back to life, pet cemetery. My anointing not based on attendance at a seminary. Scarlet witches, they attracted to the visionary. Everywhere I go, I bring the word with me, missionary. Soldier drafted in the war machine, military. Pay attention, what I'm saying to you, legendary. You got the demeanor of a front desk secretary. That mean you take the calls, but you don't make the calls. That's why you hate, cause ain't nothing fake about me at all. Now I dare you try to say that with a straight face. My delivery in tip-top great shape. I'm too advanced for you, light years, space age. No evolution for you cavemen, stone age. I'm a thoroughbred, rock solid. I came from the bottom to the top, rock climbing. I grew up in the hood, pros and cons. That's that full court pressure when the ambulance roll out that stretch. Why can't you see it's not logical? And you live diabolical. Boy, your point of view smaller than the hair follicle molecule. This for all of them that follow you, smoking all of them barbecue. When I pull up, your voice don't correct itself with no auto-tune. I got a whole nother level that I can enter whenever I gotta deal with the devil. I pick a whole nother method. I hear a whole lot of yapping. They wanna see my reaction. Really out here in the community making it happen. I don't really think they understand the dilemma. They ain't looking at the man in the mirror. I can't say it any clearer. The plan is very simple. It's time to start playing in the temple. Before somebody come and put the can on your temple. Reaching like a baby with his hand for the nipple. The Grand Reaper coming with his hand on the sickle. Hit a van coming with a ram with it. When the van come and get him. I am so glad that I changed up. Made it out of where I came from. Watch for the slide and the hook of the slow ball, fastball, and that change up. That ghetto lifestyle, it changed us. Go back to visit, it ain't changed much. Only difference is now the way that my brain process information. And Satan, but after my license, day one, let me say something. Only reason that I'm still alive today because God's grace is amazing. Just another raisin in the sun. Dream deferred when things occurred. Now you getting served right on the curb like a lemonade stand. I just gave you the benediction, let the whole church say amen.